In the heart of an African savanna, where the sun kissed the earth and the wind carried whispers of ancestral songs, there lived an old man named Mzee Baraka. His name meant blessing, and indeed, his presence was a gift to the people of his village. Mzee Baraka's home was modest, a small hut made of clay and thatch, nestled under the shade of a grand Baobab tree. This ancient tree, its gnarled roots deep in the earth, was a silent witness to generations of stories, secrets, and wisdom. Mzee Baraka was no ordinary man. Though his clothes were simple and his belongings scarce, he possessed a treasure far greater than gold or cattle: wisdom. It was said that his knowledge came from the ancestors themselves, who visited him in dreams and visions, guiding his thoughts and sharpening his insights. His grey hair shimmered like silver under the sunlight, and his weathered face bore the lines of countless years of reflection and service to his people. Every morning, Mzee Baraka sat beneath the Baobab, his wooden stool angled just so to catch the first rays of the sun. Villagers gathered around him, forming a circle of anticipation. They came with questions that no one else could answer, questions about lineage, history, and the mysteries of life. Some sought to know their roots, tracing their bloodlines to warriors, healers, or farmers of old. Others sought guidance for personal struggles, a quarrel between brothers, a failing crop, or a child stricken with illness. To each, Mzee Baraka offered words that were as simple as they were profound. One day, a woman named Mama Zubaydah approached him with tears streaming down her face. Her young son, Kato, had fallen ill with a fever that no healer could cure. Mzee Baraka, she pleaded, the spirits have turned their backs on me. My son is fading before my eyes. What can I do? Mzee Baraka closed his eyes and listened not to her words, but to the silent echoes of the spirits around him. Finally, he spoke. The spirits are not angry, Mama Zubaydah. They are waiting for you to remember your strength. Gather the leaves of the neem tree and boil them with the roots of the baobab. Bathe Kato in this water, and you will see his strength return. Desperate yet hopeful, Mama Zubaydah did as she was told. By the next morning, Kato's fever broke, and the boy was seen running barefoot through the village, his laughter a melody that brought joy to all who heard it. Word of Mzee Baraka's wisdom spread far and wide. People from neighboring villages began to arrive, drawn by tales of the old man who could see beyond what others could not. They came bearing gifts: a goat, a basket of yams, golden beads, or cloth dyed in vibrant patterns. These tokens of gratitude piled up, yet Mzee Baraka kept little for himself. Much of what he received was redistributed to the poorest in the village, for he believed that true wealth was measured by how much one could give. Despite his humility, not everyone admired Mzee Baraka. In the royal palace, King Oba Ajani watched with growing envy. The young ruler, dressed in his finest robes and seated on an intricately carved throne, could not understand how a poor old man could command such loyalty and admiration. "What does he have that I do not?" the king muttered one day, his voice thick with disdain. Beside him, his queen Nya fanned herself lazily, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "It is said that the people trust him more than they trust you, my king," she said, her words laced with venom. "They call him the keeper of wisdom. What power does a man like that have, if not to threaten your rule?" The king's jaw tightened. In that moment, a seed of jealousy took root in his heart, one that would soon grow into a vine of malice that threatened to strangle the peace of the village. Unaware of the brewing storm, Mzee Baraka continued his work, his heart heavy not with worrying, but with the responsibility of guiding his people. For he knew, as the ancestors often reminded him in whispers on the wind, that wisdom was both a blessing and a burden. The days in the village rolled by like a river's gentle current, yet beneath the surface, unseen turbulence began to brew. King Oba Ajani watched with growing unease as villagers and visitors alike flocked to the Baobab tree to seek Mzee Baraka's counsel. Gifts of gold, livestock, and rare fabrics passed from hands to the old man, and the whispers of his wisdom carried farther than the king's decrees. Why do they go to him instead of seeking my guidance? Oba Ajani fumed one evening, pacing the polished clay floors of his royal palace. His wife, Queen Nya, reclined nearby, her expression a mixture of irritation and scheming. Because they see something in him they do not see in you, she said, her voice sharp like a blade. If the people trust a man like him more than their king, it weakens your rule. The king paused, her words igniting his temper. He turned to face her, his eyes blazing. He is an old fool who hides behind riddles and the words of spirits. I am the king. It is I who have built trade routes, conquered enemies, and filled this village with prosperity. Yet they shower him with praise and gifts. Queen Nya sat up, a sly smile curling her lips. Then remind them who holds true power, my king. Mzee Baraka may speak to the spirits, but you command warriors, wealth, and the throne. If he is a thorn in your side, pluck it out before it festers. The king pondered her words. He knew his wife was right. Mzee Baraka's influence was growing, and with influence came power. That night, as the wind whispered through the palace corridors, Oba Ajani resolved to take action. The next day, the king summoned his council of elders to the royal mansion. The room, lit by shafts of sunlight streaming through narrow windows, hummed with tension. The elders, men of wisdom and age, sat cross-legged on woven mats, their faces a mosaic of curiosity and concern. I have called you here, Oba Ajani began, his voice steady but edged with anger, because there is a matter that threatens the unity of our village. This man, Mzee Baraka, has grown too bold. His influence spreads like weeds in a fertile field, and I fear it will choke the loyalty of our people. The elders exchanged uneasy glances. Chief Elder Olumide, a man whose white beard mirrored the baobab's roots, finally spoke. My king, Mzee Baraka has done no harm. He offers wisdom to those who seek it. The people respect you for your leadership and him for his guidance. Can they not honor both? Oba Ajani's fist slammed onto the low wooden table before him, startling the elders. There cannot be two suns in the sky, he bellowed. I will not have my rule undermined by a poor old man who whispers tales of the ancestors. The room fell silent, the air thick with unease. The king's words lingered like a storm cloud, and though no one dared voice it, a dangerous truth was clear. Jealousy had taken root in the king's heart. Meanwhile, beneath the baobab tree, Mzee Baraka sat, as he always did, his weathered hands resting on his wooden staff. A young woman knelt before him, her voice trembling as she recounted a dream she could not understand. In my dream, she said, I stood at the edge of a river. The water was dark, and a crocodile swam towards me, but when it opened its mouth, it spoke my name instead of biting me. What does it mean, wise one? Mzee Baraka smiled gently. The crocodile is a messenger of the spirits, my child. It does not come to harm but to guide. There is a challenge in your life that you fear, but it will not destroy you. Face it with courage, and you will find strength you did not know you had. The woman's face lit with hope, and she pressed a bundle of yams into his hands before departing. Around them, the villagers murmured their admiration. Unbeknownst to Mzee Baraka, spies from the palace lurked among the crowd, their ears sharp and their hearts loyal to Oba Ajani. By sunset, every word spoken under the baobab tree would reach the king's ears, fueling his growing rage. That evening, the king sat alone in the palace courtyard, the cool night air doing little to soothe his anger. Above him, the stars sparkled indifferently, and the distant croak of frogs echoed from the village stream. The people see him as their guide, he muttered to himself. But they will see him as a threat soon enough. In the shadows, Queen Ya appeared, her steps silent as a leopard's. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch light but firm. You must act swiftly, my king. Let the people see that their trust in him comes at a cost. Make an example of him, and they will fear your wrath. The king nodded, a cruel smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Yes, tomorrow, I will summon him to the palace. Let us see if the so-called Keeper of Wisdom can escape the judgment of his king. At dawn, the village was stirred by an unexpected proclamation. A messenger, draped in the royal colors of gold and red, stood at the center of the marketplace, his voice loud and authoritative. By order of King Oba Ajani, the messenger announced, Mzee Baraka is summoned to appear before the royal court at once. The news spread like wildfire. Villagers gathered in hushed groups, whispering their concerns. Why would the king summon Mzee Baraka? Was he to be honored or punished? Mzee Baraka, seated under the Baobab tree as usual, received the news with calm acceptance. His grey eyes reflected the morning sun as he rose to his feet, leaning on his walking stick. If the king calls, I must answer, he said simply. A small crowd followed him as he made his way to the palace. The villagers murmured words of encouragement, their respect for the old man unwavering despite the king's growing disdain. In the grand royal court, the air was thick with tension. The room was adorned with symbols of the king's power, golden spears, richly woven tapestries, and carvings of his ancestors. Oba Ajani sat on his elaborate throne, his expression stern and unyielding. To his right, Queen Ya sat with a thin smile, her eyes glittering with malice. When Mzee Baraka entered, the room fell silent. His slow but steady gait carried him forward, the soft tapping of his walking stick echoing through the hall. He stopped before the throne and bowed his head. My king, he said, his voice steady and respectful. You have summoned me, how may I serve you? Oba Ajani leaned forward, his piercing gaze fixed on the old man. Wise Mzee, he began, his tone laced with venom, I have heard much about you. The people call you the Keeper of Wisdom, but I do not see how a poor man like you can have such influence over my subjects. You are a thorn in my side, and I hereby decree that you leave this village immediately. Mzee Baraka, however, did not flinch. He met the king's gaze with quiet dignity. My king, he said, I have done nothing but serve this village with the gifts given to me by the ancestors. If my presence displeases you, I will go, but remember, wisdom cannot be banished, nor can truth be silenced. They live in the hearts of the people. The king's face darkened. Enough of your riddles, old man. You will leave this village by sundown, or my guards will ensure you do.
Mzee Baraka bowed again. As you wish, my king. The news of the decree spread rapidly. The villagers were stunned, their hearts heavy with sorrow. Many wept openly, while others cursed the king under their breath. How can he do this? A young farmer asked, his fists clenched. Mzee Baraka has done nothing but help us. It is jealousy, an elder replied. The king fears the old man's wisdom, because it shows him his own shortcomings. By late afternoon, Mzee Baraka prepared to leave. A few villagers gathered at the Baobab tree, their faces full of sadness. Some brought gifts: a small bag of grain, a goat, a woven blanket as tokens of gratitude. Mzee Baraka, an elderly woman said, her voice trembling, you have been our guide, our light in times of darkness. Without you, who will we turn to? Mzee Baraka placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. The ancestors are always with you, he said. Listen to the wind, to the earth, and to your own hearts. They will guide you. As the sun dipped low in the sky, Mzee Baraka began his journey out of the village. He walked slowly, his wooden staff tapping against the ground in rhythm with his steps. Behind him, a group of villagers followed at a distance, their heads bowed in silent mourning. The Baobab tree stood alone, its wide branches reaching skyward, as if mourning the departure of the old man who had sat beneath its shade for so many years. At the edge of the village, Mzee Baraka paused and turned to the crowd. "Do not despair," he said. "Even in my absence, my prayers will be with you. And remember, the truth cannot be silenced, no matter how far it is cast away." With those final words, he turned and walked into the horizon, the setting sun casting long shadows behind him. In the palace, Oba Ajani watched from a high balcony, his expression unreadable. Queen Yor stood beside him, a smug smile on her lips. "You've done well, my king," she said. "With him gone, your rule will be unquestioned." But deep in his heart, Oba Ajani felt a twinge of doubt. He shook it off, convincing himself that he had made the right decision. Yet, the seeds of his downfall had already been sown. The absence of Mzee Baraka was felt immediately. The once lively and harmonious village seemed to lose its spirit. The Baobab tree, where people had once gathered to hear stories and seek advice, stood eerily quiet. Children who used to play around its roots now avoided it, as if its emptiness was a wound too deep to bear. News of Mzee Baraka's banishment spread to the neighboring villages. Merchants passing through shook their heads in disbelief when they heard the tale. Why would King Oba Ajani banish the only man who truly understood the ways of the ancestors? One trader asked. This village will not prosper without his wisdom. The villagers themselves were stricken with grief. Those who had relied on Mzee Baraka's guidance felt adrift. Farmers whose crops had thrived after following his advice now worked with uncertainty. Mothers who had sought his remedies for their children's illnesses prayed for his safety, fearing that no one else could offer the same counsel. One evening, a young woman named Audia, known for her courage and sharp tongue, gathered some of her friends at the marketplace. "This is wrong," she declared, her voice shaking with emotion. "How can we sit by and do nothing, while the man who saved our village countless times is cast out like a thief?" Her friends nodded in agreement, but their faces were clouded with fear. "What can we do, Audia?" one of them asked. "The king is too powerful. If we speak out, we risk our own lives. If we do nothing, we risk losing more than our lives. We risk losing the very soul of our village." Despite her passion, the fear of the king's wrath silenced most of the villagers. Only a few dared to whisper their dissatisfaction, but even they avoided speaking too loudly, lest the royal guards overhear. Meanwhile, life in the royal palace continued as usual. King Oba Ajani held court, settling disputes among his subjects and overseeing trade agreements. But even amidst his duties, he could not shake the feeling that something was missing. Queen Yor, sensing her husband's unease, tried to console him. "Why do you trouble yourself, my king?" she asked one evening as they dined. "The old man is gone. The people will soon forget him, and your rule will remain unquestioned." But Oba Ajani frowned. "The people whisper, Nya, I see it in their eyes. They do not say it openly, but they mourn his absence. It is as if I have taken something from them that cannot be replaced." Queen Yor placed a hand on his arm. "Then remind them of your power. Show them that you are the one who keeps this village strong. They will learn to respect you in time." Oba Ajani nodded, but his doubts lingered, festering like a wound beneath his pride. In the weeks that followed, strange occurrences began to unsettle the village. The skies, once clear and bright, grew overcast. The river, which had always flowed freely, began to stagnate. Livestock grew ill, and crops that should have flourished withered inexplicably. The villagers were quick to connect these misfortunes to Mzee Baraka's departure. "The ancestors are angry," an elder said gravely during a meeting at the marketplace. "They blessed us through Mzee Baraka, and we have let him be cast out. Now, we must face their wrath." The younger villagers, like Audia, were especially vocal. "This is what happens when wisdom is silenced by power," she said, her voice ringing with defiance. "The king's jealousy has brought this upon us.